welcome. It's lovely to have you join us here today in the Leadership Lounge here in February. We're going to be looking today at the topic of the power of praise. And joining me today, I have three marvellous guests. I have Vic Banks, and Vic Banks is from Vic Banks Coaching and also is one of the associate coaches here at Everyday Leaders. So it's great to have Vic with us today. We have Tracy Jackman, who is the Senior Improvement Lead for Patient Safety Collaborative at East Midlands Academic Health Science Network. So great to have Tracy join us here today. And then we have Matt Tapscott, Body Shop Equipment Coordinator at PPG. So great to have you all here. A little quick intro for our listeners. So Vic, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Right, thanks, Colin. I am a coach working with individuals and organisations, and that can be helping people think about and tussle with all sorts of issues to improve their performance and their personal well-being and direction. My background is pretty varied. I worked in large companies. I worked for British Gas for quite a long time. I've also run my own business, a small business, and worked for several years with social enterprises, both running social enterprises and supporting people leading social enterprises. I also, on the side, am a writer, but unlike Colin, not published yet, but working on it.
Brilliant.
That's what I do.
Brilliant. Vic, you bring such a range of experience into this, both as a coach, but also some that's worked with large organisations and community-based organisations. And as you say, bringing your involvement as an author and understanding that too. Soon to be published, hopefully then, from what you've said. Fantastic. So Tracy, welcome to you. You have possibly the longest title that any guest on the Leadership Lounge has had. So tell us a little bit about what that is all about.
Okay, so I work in the Patient Safety Collaborative of, as you said, the East Midlands Academic Health Science Network. I'm sure not many people will necessarily know what that is, but it's the innovation arm of the NHS. So the role of the organisation is to work with people in, organisations, systems, to think about what good ideas they might hold and innovation that could improve patient safety, patient care, and to help them to put that into practice and then prove, what that real life impact has been, and then help that sort of spread across the system to improve patient safety and patient care. So that's the nub of it. I come from, like Vic said, a bit of a different background in the sense I started off in a clinical role and then moved through various leadership roles, and essentially just I think what I love most is just enabling people. And so I did some study on sort of organisational development and change. So that's the kind of interest I have, I suppose, about how we help each other lead and do change. And that's me. Yeah.
Brilliant. And so all that experience about enabling people and innovating is going to be fantastic, helping our listeners today. So thank you for joining us. And then Matt, you are a Body Shop Equipment Coordinator for PPG. So what is that all about?
It's Body Shop, not the shop where you can get nice smelly soaps. It's not that.
It's not Body Shop, right? Okay,
it's not Body Shop, the shop. No. So I work for PPG, which is a refinish and coatings business. It's a global company. I work in the car refinish segment of that company, and the kind of Body Shop element is basically all our customers. So where you'll see them spraying and fixing cars, basically. So my role in PPG, this is kind of my third or fourth role within the 3 years or so I've been there. I basically, all the new customers we get, I have to essentially sort out all their new equipment, liaising with our sales reps and our engineers to basically make sure that they install the right equipment at the right time. And yeah, basically a lot of organisation, a lot of kind of admin-y stuff. So I've been doing that for about a year now. So
great. And so again, really working with people, so that ability to connect with people, and therefore the topic of praise and recognition topic today is going to be really important. So thank you for joining us in the team today in the Leadership Lounge as we explore this topic. So, as you know, we have a topic each month, and today's one is all around the power of praise. And a bit of research preparing for this. The dictionary definition of praise is warm approval or admiration. And to me, when I looked at that, that just seemed a little bit limp for what we're going to be looking at today. If you know, praising someone is giving them warm approval or admiration, it just sounds so tepid. I don't think it does justice to the impact and the power that can have, because using appropriate praise as a leader can have a profound effect on those that we lead. There's the short-term impact, of course, things like this sense of pride and the increased feelings of self-esteem, the kind of chemical reaction, the release of dopamine, that neurotransmitter that helps control the reward and pleasure senses in the brain. But it goes beyond that, because when we regularly use praise appropriately, it has the power to really engage people in the right things and make people more productive and help with the retention of staff. So today, as those of us in the Leadership Lounge, we're just going to explore what is the impact of praise and how and when to give praise, just so that as leaders, those of you who are listening, it can really help with that. As part of my research, I came across something called the carrot principle. A bit of research, a 10-year motivation study. I assume that it was called the carrot principle because of that archetypal dangling the carrot in front of the donkey. But over 10 years, they surveyed 200,000 employees and managers. And in their analysis, they discovered that the impact of recognizing their employees and praising them led to lower turnover rates than managers who weren't doing that, better results from people, and much better communication and trust and accountability amongst the team. So this can have a real impact, and these kind of studies have shown that. So, but what's the experience of our guests in terms of just seeing and experiencing this praise, going beyond perhaps the warm approval or admiration? So, Tracy, let's start with you. Kind of, what's your experience of just kind of seeing praise in the workplace? What's been the impact of that?
I think it's massive impact, really, and I think it's about the people themselves. I think there's a sense where in the workplace, even in the workplace, we all need to know that we belong, you know, and that we're valued and we're part of something important. And I think if people are given praise, then it kind of it builds that collective identity. I'm doing a good job. We're in this together. So I think there's something very personal about praise. But I think for me personally, and also others that I've worked with, I can genuinely say I wouldn't have taken some of the moves in my career path, or maybe, you know, gone for those riskier decisions if I hadn't had people around me who were giving me that sort of feedback and a sense of where my sort of strengths were and what they were appreciating, but in a very meaningful way. I mean, it's really good, isn't it, that we can just be spontaneous as well and just give that, oh, thanks for that was great. Yeah. But that real kind of meaningful feedback and praise has helped me understand what I'm good at, what I want to contribute, but also to then give that to others. And I can see people who have been in my teams, and I've seen something in them that's been really strong and been able to invest in that. And that's led them as well to enjoy maybe situations at work they wouldn't have naturally had the confidence to necessarily go for unless they'd had that kind of feedback from people around them who knew them and knew what they brought each day when they came to work.
Yeah. I love I hadn't actually even thought of what you've talked about there, this sense that praise gives this sense of connection into the community, this sense of, you're praising them because they're doing something that's contributing towards the direction that your organisation is doing, and that praise kind of says to them, you are part of this, you're contributing to this, you're making a difference, and therefore them feeling that sense of worth as part of that, and just identifying them as part of that group. I think that's massive. Yeah, thank you. Vic, what about you? Have you seen a similar thing? Is there a different thing you've seen to the impact of praise?
I think it's really interesting because it's such a personal thing, actually. I think how you praise somebody and what is actually meaningful to somebody is very different for different people. Yeah. And in different contexts as well. I was thinking about myself and thinking that if I'm learning something, then I remember years ago very badly trying to learn to snowboard. And when the instructor told me that I'd done something well, it was really encouraging and really helped me to persist, because in that context, I knew that I wasn't very good at it. And I've done something quite well. I've done something good. And yet in other contexts where I expect myself to be good, I expect to be able to do something, then somebody else's praise is only really meaningful if I feel like I've done a good job. So you can praise me as much as you like, but if in my head I'm going, nah, I could have done better, then it's really hard to receive that. So I think that's just an example of how praise is quite contextual. And just say, I'm sure it will come out in our discussion that different things work for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I as you explained that, I was reminded of Seth Godin's kind of quote where he talked about people will never believe what you tell them. They'll sometimes believe what their friends tell them, but they'll always believe what they tell themselves. So this sense that if your praise isn't quite fitting into the perspective of where that person sees it is, it doesn't always necessarily land. But the importance you're talking about there of giving praise, particularly as people are learning and growing and discovering and maybe are feeling that element of vulnerability. And you're right, we will explore further this concept of the right praise for the right person, as well as thinking what best suits them and what methods best suit. So yeah, that's fantastic. And just
to pick up on what you said about Seth Godin, I think what can be really helpful with people is asking them what they think went well.
Yeah.
Because then, of course, you can reinforce that. And as you just say, that ties into, they've recognised that that's been good. And so you can reinforce that. And then you can ask them, what would they do differently? And that means that you can help them to see what's possible without it becoming the stick to follow the camera.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's the coaching perspective as well, isn't it? Just looking at it, what's working well and being able to then build upon that. Or if actually they're misjudging and misunderstanding what they're doing well, you again can address that with an and rather than a but. So it's really good. Great. Thanks, Vic. Matt, what about you? Have you experienced or seen the impact of praise and recognition?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I'm fairly early on in my working career, if you want to put it that way. So the last couple of years has been a lot of praise kind of shot towards me, which is always nice. It makes you want to work harder for either the organisation or the person that's kind of said it towards you. A lot of the time, it's from kind of management where you're working, and it's always nice to be told what you just did there was brilliant. Obviously, no one wants to know when they're doing something bad, but equally you want to know if you're doing something wrong. But it like I just said, it just makes you want to work harder for the organisation and just continue to just be better at what you're doing as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially when you're not necessarily feeling so great about what you're doing. If it's a bit of a ploppy job that you've been asked to do, and actually what you get out of it is a bit of praise and actually I did do well at that. That's spot on. Best you could have got from it.
So actually you're reiterating what the research says, that actually it does motivate, it does encourage, it makes you want to be more productive or continue to be productive, which is
definitely.
Yeah, great. So Vic, you mentioned earlier, not published like Colin. So it's a great opportunity for me to say, and in my book. So in my book, Everyday People, Everyday Leaders, I explain a phrase that I use called meerkat moments. This sense that if you've ever seen the nature programs where you see a whole batch of meerkats, I don't know if that is a collective term for meerkats, but I've just called them that. I'll probably have some zoologists ringing up now saying that is not the collective noun for meerkats. But meerkats, when they hear a noise, they all kind of perk up, don't they? And they look in the direction of where the noise is. And so we can create meerkat moments in leadership when we use praise, because what that does is people, what, they're being praised over there, and they turn to the point of where the praise is and want to follow suit, because that's where the attention is going then. So recognizing the good things that people have done does encourage others to follow suit in those meerkat moments. So Vic, what is it, do you know what is it about recognition that is so important important for people, or is it? Is Meerkat Moments just this strange thing? Why is recognition important?
I think you used a really important word there when you talked about attention, and you were talking about attention being given to somebody. And I think there's quite a lot of research that shows that one of the main motivators for people is receiving attention from their managers or from people that they respect. And obviously praise is one way of doing that. I remember years ago when I was very new working in a call centre, and I'd had a really difficult call with someone, and a few minutes later, maybe half an hour later, the boss of the whole company, the whole call centre, came down and said, "Oh, I've just had a call from the customer," and he was really impressed with the way that you'd sorted out that call. And he quite embarrassedly handed me a little envelope which had some vouchers in. I just want to say thank you. But the impact of having somebody very senior noticing you for 2 minutes, it's a bit like Matt was saying, you'd walk over hot coals for that person because they've given you their attention.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about the Meerkat thing, there is people value attention. So if they see attention being given, as long as it's being given, I think, for something that is valid, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that, about when is praise valid, then it is really motivational to other people as well, because everybody wants a piece of that.
Yeah. And there's this sense, isn't it, that it's interesting. You recounted a story. You said, back in the day when I was in the call center, you still remember it. And I'm sure actually as you told it, you can almost visualize it and see it and almost smell the room again. There's this sense, isn't it, that has a real long-term impact on us, but equally those around us see it too, because it's this sense of, perhaps it comes back a bit to what Tracy said at the beginning, the sense of being part of the whole, being contributing and seeing that is important. So Tracy, what is the impact you've seen in the workplace when someone's been given recognition for their achievement or effort?
I think, it just means a lot, like Vic and Matt have said already. It means a lot to that person to be recognised and to be given feedback, and that whole sense of making them want to work harder, and they feel they get more job satisfaction. I think the other thing it does, though, I do think it's quite, I know culture is a difficult thing to pin down, but I think as leaders, there's something about, we give messages when we praise things. We're sort of like the meerkat. It's that sense of recognising what's important.
Yeah.
So what you praise gives some messages about, I think, what's important. So, if I'm like Vic's example there, where she's being, sorry to bring out your example, but where she's being praised for the way she's interacted and the way she's treated somebody, the way she's communicated, that gives a message that it's not just about getting that person off the phone and moving on to the next call. It's giving a message that actually around here it matters, that how you treat people and how you behave. So I think the recognition is a personal thing, but it also shapes culture because it tells people what's important in what we recognise.
Yeah. And I just wondered, since you're saying around culture, I just think when we are praising someone and giving the well dones appropriately, there's this sense where I think this praise and recognition can be part of creating a culture of safety. So there's an author called Mary Myatt who wrote a book called High Challenge, Low Threat, and she talks about we don't mind high challenge, but it's the threat, high threat that we don't like. And actually, when we use praise, that could be part of that culture of safety, because actually, if I do things well, if, as you say, is the process of what I did, that I get praise, then that creates of it, okay, so I can try things then and do things, but this is the area that I particularly need to focus on. So it does create that culture. So what about meerkat moments? Have you ever done a meerkat moment? Have you ever caused the meerkats to look up? in your leadership?
I remember one moment, and I didn't realise I was doing a meerkat moment, and it's not dissimilar from Vic's story, but I used to work in an open office, and I would have hear a particular medical secretary day in, day out, and she would have to have lots of conversations with people where they were, maybe really anxious, upset, concerned. We worked in children's services, so you'd have parents calling in who were very worried and needed to access the help, and they were sometimes complaining in a way that was difficult for her to take. And day in, day out, she was patient, she was kind, she was empathetic. And it just really struck me. And I think when you're a person in senior leadership, you don't think of yourself as a person in senior leadership, but other people do. So I just went up to her and just said, can I just say, I'm just so impressed about every day how you talk to people on the phone and how caring and how patient, and it's just really impressive, and carry on. And I was just really aware in that moment that it was almost like everyone stopped in all these desks. And I hadn't really realised I was doing anything other than just wanting to tell her that she was fantastic at her job and really treating people with the kind of values that we wanted. But that was definitely a meerkat moment.
Yeah. I've just got this picture now of literally the whole world stopping and then everyone in slow motion looking in your direction. And so huge impact then for that person who was dealing with that day in, day out, but also on the others that turned to it.
I think there's other times as well you're more intentional with it. So, that was almost like just a natural response. But I think there's ways that you can use praise to and thankfulness. So I know in my team meetings, we would sometimes start up with, well, what's gone well? What are we thankful for? To try and kind of build that. And that was almost an intentional meerkat moment, if you like. And sometimes praising and thanking others that other people aren't used to working with. So I work across the system. So, if you're praising people who are in other parts of the system, maybe voluntary sector, social care, education, and they're not used to working together, again, that gives a bit of a signal that this person is okay, they're doing a really good work, we can work together and come together and do that and build trust. So I think giving praise to people is also giving kind of acceptance within a group setting as well. Yeah,
and what you're talking about there again is establishing that culture, isn't it? Particularly if you're working in a setting where it's across teams. Actually, when you're praising someone from another team, that says to everyone else, we respect this team, we encourage that team, we praise that team. This is who we are, this is part of our identity. And it's interesting you're talking about that purposeful. I can think of times where I sensed actually this is something our organisation needs to focus on now. And so you deliberately take time to, whenever you see it, you almost hunt it out to praise it and say well done to it, so that it raises the bar and they turn towards it in that sense, as you say, being quite deliberate rather than necessarily responsive. Yeah, brilliant. Matt, you mentioned earlier, how praise helps you be productive. I know you're a hard worker, but sort of how does that? What does that look like for you? How does praise help you to be more productive?
I mean, I kind of said a little bit earlier in the first question. If you've been given a bad task that you really don't like doing, but you get that recognition, that praise for the outcome of that or for something else, it just makes you more motivated to continue doing that, even though you don't want to. You think, actually, no, I've just been told I've just done a great job at A, so regardless of me not liking B, I'm going to keep doing it because I'm feeling good about myself. You just get that boost of confidence. Yeah. And that small obstacle that you thought you didn't want to do, actually, it's nothing, and you can just easily, swipe it away. Just because, like I said, you just feel good. You just feel good about yourself because someone who, isn't your parent or your best mate or whatever has actually acknowledged that what you're doing is a great job. And I know some people don't hear that enough, and I think it's a bit of a crime, really, that it's not said more to people. So
Yeah, I love that concept that we would make this a crime. I think that's something we could encourage to go into. Not encouraging and praising people should be classed as a crime, because we've talked, haven't we, about the impact that can have on the person, the impact it can have on the culture of your organisation, the impact it can have on you as an individual, the impact it can have on productivity. I love that concept that we make this a crime. I think that's great. Yeah, I know as well. You work in a volunteer setting, so I know that you work with adults and children in a voluntary setting in a football club. It's unpaid. You're unpaid. They're unpaid. So I think praise is really important, and recognition is really important. How do you use praise and recognition in that context with the young people that you work with, and what's the kind of impact of that?
So, I mean, I at a football club, volunteering, running a football team for boys and obviously girls aged 12, 13. So they're kind of at the age now where, they're just developing their skill. We've got a variety of skill sets, skill levels, and kind of like what Vic mentioned earlier, how you praise certain individuals changes depending on who they are, and you get to learn that after you've spent time with your teams and things like that. So, like Vic said, different people have different ways they want to be praised. So, the people at the top, the kind of top skilled players in our team, they don't necessarily want to be highlighted in front of everyone, or some do want to be highlighted in front of everyone, depending on how their character is as well. There's one boy in particular who he's probably head and shoulders above the rest. So for him, I would just go up to him and just say, what you did there was brilliant. Now I want you to try this. Or, give him a little challenge after the praise. Because for him, he knows that he's a good footballer. He's not cocky about it, but he knows he's a good footballer. So for me, just saying to him, what you did, that shot on goal was brilliant. He knows it's brilliant. So if I said to him, that was brilliant, now I want you to try that with your left foot, or I want you to try that, I give him a little challenge on top of that as well. So he's felt good about himself, but then he's more determined and motivated to try and then sort out the little challenge I've given him as well.
So I love what you're talking about there, this blend of praise and challenge. But I also love the way it's really understanding those that you're working with. And so that particular lad, he just needs the quiet one-to-one. And for others, you said actually it's more the public recognition is really important for them, and it's understanding people's characters as well as the position that they're in. So that's fantastic. A real sense then of whatever context we're in, actually, whether it is working with volunteers or whether it's working in a paid setting, just understanding what works with people is absolutely crucial.
I think that's a real challenge, isn't it? Because like Tracy, you were saying about speaking to that person in, the medical secretary, and it was in the moment that you felt like, oh, she's just so great at this. I want to tell her that she's great at it. And hopefully that went down really well. And the more you get to know people, I guess the more you get to know, is that going to go down well, or are they going to go and hide under the desk?
Absolutely.
For the next hour.
And it's kind of trial and error, isn't it? When you're first with a team, it's just trial and error. You get to learn how they are after a while. You start to learn the individual and the whole group how they best kind of react to praise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's come back to us as leaders really getting to know the people that we work with. And I think, Matt, you're right as well. There's a sense of trial and error. I can think of times where I've said publicly to someone, this is great, fantastic. Thank you so much for doing X, for whatever they've done. And you just look and you can see in their eyes, they are dying. And so you go, right, okay, I need to cut this public praise quite short because if I keep going on, it's going to make it feel a bit worse for them. And then, next time, actually, they're a private praise person. So I think there is that sense, isn't there? I mean, Tracy, have you ever discovered that? Have ever gone to do a bit of public praise and it's not quite worked out? I mean, you were nodding when Vic said, I assume it went all right with the secretary.
Yeah, it did. But I can think of people I've worked with that, as you get to know them, as we've talked about, you get a sense, if I praise them publicly, they will it won't be a gift. Whereas actually, if you just draw alongside them, like Matt's just said, and just have quiet word, or even when they see it coming, so they know they've got an appraisal coming, so they're ready for feedback, things like that, where you need to tailor it. And I think there's something about knowing the people around you as well, to know their personalities, their skills and their character. Because if we just praise, like Matt said, if you just praise the best person for results, that's a little bit damaging potentially, because actually, what about praising somebody who in your team, okay, they may not be the front runner, they may not, be the one that will get that amazing, impressive goal, but actually they're there day in, day out, they're working hard, they're doing their best, and actually praising people from where they're at, not expecting everyone to be on the same kind of motivation at work, or whatever it is. You need to get to know the people around you so that your praise is real, I think, and tailored.
Yeah, and I'm reminded there's that whole concept around love languages, isn't it, which I think was initially brought in for looking at relationships with people, but equally has been used in business. Just knowing and understanding what is someone's love language, what makes them feel good. Is it the hand on the shoulder, which clearly we're not allowed to do now with COVID? But is it the hand on the shoulder, as you say it in the old days, or is it the words? Is it for some people, just the little chocolate bar or piece of fruit, if we're being well behaved, placed on their desk? What is it that is the encouragement to them, and knowing, understanding, and perhaps not giving the diabetic the high sugar version?
Yeah, because for some people, praise is actually giving them a chance at something, giving them an opportunity. It's not always like you say, the chocolate or the round of applause or whatever else.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, that praise for some people is opportunity. It's just because that's what it is. But praise is recognizing something that's good, isn't it? And giving credits to it. So that recognition of, I think you could do this job, and giving them the opportunity is an element of praise too. Yeah. Fantastic.
I think recognition praise is part of recognition, isn't it? Praise is one tool in the recognition toolbox, if you like, because there are other ways to do it depending on the person and what's suitable. And I think it depends as well, what are you praising? We've talked about praising people for effort, and you can also, you may also want to praise people for results. And I think being clear about the fact that there are different types of praise is important too. I think particularly in the work context, you may want to praise, you want to praise outcomes often. This is the way, this is how we want it done. This is the way we want something to be presented, or this is how we want something to be resolved. And then in other contexts, or for different people, like Tracy and Matt have both said, you're talking about encouraging people to keep going, so that they can reach those other levels. But it's knowing what you're praising people for, isn't it? That is also part of the equation, I think. Yeah.
And so it's interesting. We're kind of moving into the how we give praise bit, isn't it? And we've just talked about suitability for that praise, and then there's this thing: is it for outcomes or is it for effort? It's really interesting that the psychologist Carol Dweck has done a whole load of work just around how you create. Her particular focus was around children and how you make them kind of resilient and not kind of giving up. And her advice is to focus on the process they use, their strategies, their effort, their choices, and this sense of constructive feedback based around effort and approach can really engage them in something. Matt, when you've worked with children in a volunteer context, you mentioned earlier you vary that. Do you use praise for effort at all, or is it all about outcomes? What is it for you?
No, effort and outcome, definitely. Like I said, mixture of abilities, and they're at the age now where they know they might not necessarily be the best player on the team, or might not feel that they're as good as anyone else. So a lot of the time it is. I would say we use more effort which kind of links to encouragement as well, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can't put a price on just continually trying to encourage and praising people for effort. Obviously, that might differ depending on what the situation is, because you don't want necessarily the praise to lose value at all. Because I guess it can be overused in certain situations, and where kind of what Vic said, if you don't feel, I think it was Vic, or it might be Tracy, I can't remember now, said, if you don't feel like you've done a good job, and you continue being told what you've just done brilliant, that person's praise to you might be of no value anymore, because it's continued being kind of said to you. So, but in that football and volunteering sense, definitely both. A lot of the time that it's the effort first, and then finally you get that big praise at the end because the outcome has come off, them feeling good about the constant praise of their effort. And then finally they play that brilliant pass, they score that worldy goal, which they haven't been able to before. And, even if it was a tiny percentage of your praise that had helped create that outcome, it's definitely a win.
Yeah. So that mixture. Tracy, what is it for you? Is it effort or results? What have you seen the impact of in each of those contexts?
I mean, like Matt said, I think there's a bit of both. And it's, we need to praise people for results. I mean, in the NHS, you'll have all heard, they're up against a tremendous task. So it's important to praise them for results. But I think for me, I probably give more focus in the day-to-day to effort and intent and hard work and behaviours, because I think they're sort of fundamental, aren't they? If you feel that you're in a situation where you're getting praise for your effort and doing your best and just bringing who you are, then I think you'll work hard and you'll do your best. You'll want to do that, and then results follow. So for me, it's got to be both. But I think if you're in a situation where there's too much praise and too much focus on results, it's actually quite detrimental.
Yeah.
Because actually it becomes a message that's almost close to, we don't care about you, we just care about you getting the job done. Whereas I think when you do both and you notice that people have helped get massive results and you have to thank them and want to thank them for that, but actually you're noting their contribution as a person, I think that's much, much more enabling. And obviously a lot of what I've talked about before, I love to help people achieve results through their own ideas and innovation and trying things that are safe and important to do. And that's part of recognition as well. Actually, that idea you had there is really good. What can we do to try and help you try that out safely and benefit patients, benefit the system?
Yeah.
So results follow, I think, when you take people seriously and recognise what they bring.
Yeah. So this really interesting is that when we're giving praise, we've talked about the importance then that it's suitable for the person. We've talked about it's important that we have that blend of some praise for effort and some for outcomes and achievements. And I love particularly what you said there, Tracy, around, if we're always praising just the outcome, it can make it feel like they're not important. It's just their output that's important. And to create this sense of identity of team that we talked about earlier, and the sense of value in individuals, it's important they have that. One of the other areas that I think is really important when we're giving praise, which we've kind of intimated, so let's delve a little bit deeper on it, is this sense of praise being genuine. The Gallup organisation, which in my day, they were the ones that just produced the record charts, but they do lots of other analysis and data now. And what they did in some of their research is they came up with unearned praise can do more harm to an individual and a work group than none at all. And it not only prevents employees from knowing when they need to improve, but it can diminish the impact of genuine praise that's offered at other times. So Vic, what is it for you? What is it about praise being genuine that's so important?
I think it goes back to that notion of relationship, that people aren't stupid. They can tell whether you're being genuine or not. And if you genuinely care about the people that you're working with and you genuinely want them to do a good job and you want to encourage them and support them, then they'll pick that up. And that, as I mentioned before, that being recognised and being given attention. People know if you do that to everybody irrespective, or if you do that meaningfully. And it's really important to do it meaningfully, because as Matt says, otherwise it's a currency that becomes totally devalued. If you pat someone on the back every day for everything that they've done, it's like, well, when does it become meaningful?
I just as you were saying that, I'm old enough to remember the Grace Brothers, Are You Being Served? And there was, for those of us not old enough to remember, they would bring down old, or whether it was young Mr. Grace or old Mr. Grace, both of them, of course, were very old. And every now and again, he would be brought down the elevator and he would come out onto the shop floor and he would just go, "You're all doing very well." And then off he would trot again. And it was just this bland regularity that had no real link to it. And it just devalued it, and it then became part of the joke of that sitcom, didn't it? And I think you're right, people see it, don't they, and spot it.
And I think praise, it should be earned, whether it's earned for effort or it's earned for results. There needs to be an objective reason for it. And because then it makes sense to people. Okay, yeah, you're saying that to me because I've done this or I've done it this way. And I think particularly if somebody significantly more senior gives that praise, takes time and effort, that, in a bigger organisation, like I say, I was a little person sitting on the phones, and then, somebody with 1,100 members of staff comes and says to you, "Job done, job well done," then that has a real impact. And and I could tell that was genuine, because that wasn't something that you saw in the office every day. And of course it's different if you are in the office every day, then you will do it in a different way. But I think people can tell if it's genuine or not, and it is only of value if it's genuine.
For me, as I'm listening to you say that, there's this thing for me. It's like, as a leader, where is your heart beating? And if you actually are, your heartbeat rises when you see that and you love it, and therefore you then say a well done for it, then there's probably an indicator that what you're doing there is genuine. But Tracy, are there any other top tips about how to be genuine? I know that question's probably almost an oxymoron, because we're going to be asking, how could I be genuine? Which then, of course, sounds not particularly genuine. But in your experience, how do we give genuine praise and recognition? Is it just about when your heart beats a little more? What is it?
Well, as I'm thinking about the answer to that, I'm thinking it sounds like a contradiction, because I think you need one of two things. You need utter spontaneity, so that you can just give natural, in the moment praise without overthinking it, and that's very authentic in itself. But I think as well, you shouldn't be afraid of being intentional in where you target praise, because there's authenticity there, in the sense that you're thinking as a person in a workplace. What sort of workplace do we want to be? What sort of team do we want to be? And actually, by investing, and I think we've said praise is one element of recognition. So whatever tools we have about recognition, if we invest them in the things that are important, then that signals something to the rest of the team. So I think it's not being afraid to be spontaneous in your praise and recognition, but also actually being intentional and putting action behind your words. So if I note somebody in my team is really good at something, then I do think it's important to give them an opportunity that follows that. So, I'm not just saying to them, "Oh, this is really good, that's great," and then, walking away for the next 5 years saying the same, "Oh, that's really good," but actually trying to think with them. So we know that you're good at this. We know you're really gifted at that. How do you want to use that in the workplace? And so I think it is multi-layered. So it can sound like a contradiction, but it can be spontaneous and quite light, but equally it can be quite intentional and signal something very important.
Yeah, and I love the key that you talked about there, that actually your action then follows through. If it is this genuine, honest, well done, and you are good at this, that we then give them opportunity to exercise that. And I love this concept there. You don't then just walk away for the next 5 years on them. You actually enable them to put that into practice. So again, it comes back to what we were saying earlier, wasn't it, around that recognition means actually putting them into a position where they can utilize what they're good at. I just wonder, as we come towards the end of our podcast time, we just look at this whole thing around retention. One of the things that the research said was that praise can help retention. So we'll just look at that briefly. And then after that, we come to the point where I ask guests to think about their top tip around praise, the power of praise. One thing that you want perhaps our listeners to go away with. So that gives you chances, those in our Leadership Lounge, just to be mulling, what could my one top tip be? But let's just look at this thing about retention. So again, the Gallup organization did some research on this, and that recognition's a short-term need that has to be satisfied on an ongoing basis. And what they discovered, though, that if you do that on an ongoing basis, that someone who is not recognized is 3 times more likely to leave the following year. And therefore, when we are appropriately praising and recognizing people and encouraging them, we're therefore 3 times more likely to hold on to them. So it's got a real power for retention. So bearing in mind for organizations, the huge cost in recruitment, you can save costs by praise. So there you go. There's another power of praise. But Tracy, have you seen that in a work context? Have you seen the difference that can make to retention?
Yeah, and interestingly, when I did my master's study on organisational development, I did my study on this area. So I was trying to look at whether leadership behaviour impacted nurse retention. So were nurses affected in their likelihood to stay or leave, depending on how their leaders treated them? So I had nurses were interviewed, and this whole issue about praise and affirmation came up really strongly. They were talking about, we can't carry on caring unless we're cared for and supported. And it was interesting that care and support was very closely aligned to being valued, being thanked, being given feedback. And you'd get quotes, praise just goes a long way, doesn't it? Almost as if, that can really be an influential factor on whether people stay or leave. And I think you can see that either in yourself or with people you've worked with, that, if you're in a job where you feel that sense of job satisfaction, you're getting affirmed, you'll want to stay. If you're not sure if you're doing a good job, if you're not sure you fit, if you're not sure you're kind of performing in a way that you need to, you're more likely to think maybe this job's not for me at a very sort of simple layer. So I think absolutely it's really, really important that we're not falsely praising, but we're looking out for opportunities to praise and recognise people in the workplace. We're there a lot of the time, aren't we?
Increasingly so. And I love that key concept in what you're talking about. It brings us back to that thing again around value. It brings value. People feel value. And if they feel valued in a place, they're more likely to want to kind of stay in that place as well. Again, from my research, there was in 2008 a strategy consultancy called the Whitewater Strategies. They did some work on that actually praise can be the equivalent of a 1% pay rise for people. And the Japanese National Institute for Psychological Sciences have also discovered that being paid a compliment activates the same part of the brain as receiving cash. I wonder if that has something to do with retention. So Vic, is receiving praise as good as cash? Is this the new currency? What do you think to that one?
It really surprises me. It really surprises me that they only think it's equivalent to 1%.
Right. You think it's worth more?
I think it's worth far more than that. Because once, there've been lots of studies that show that people aren't really motivated by cash. once their needs are met. And obviously people's needs are different. Oh, I'm losing my headphones here. People's needs are different. But once you have met the needs that you have, to cover your mortgage and your, whatever costs you think are relevant, there's only so much extra money can do for you. And I know plenty of people who've left high paid jobs for lower paid jobs because of the value and the ethics and the interest in the work. So it does surprise me that it's only 1%. And I absolutely think that people are going to stay in jobs and that it's going to have a powerful impact on retention if they are recognised, if they get attention from management, if they feel like what they do is valued. Because like Tracy said, there is nothing worse than going into work and feeling like nobody notices what you do. Nobody really cares about what you do. Whereas as soon as somebody notices, oh, what I'm doing has importance, it has value, and it makes a huge difference. And I think, if your norm and your expectation is that money, we're going to get a bonus. Well, what happens if you don't get a bonus the next year? That's actually then becomes a demotivator, doesn't it? If the company doesn't do as well the next year or whatever. Whereas, praise is not determined by financials, so you can carry on praising people and giving people encouragement, irrespective of what's happening in the economics of the organisation.
Absolutely. Matt, what about you? Do you see praise as the new currency? If you had the choice between praise and cash, and probably you need to answer this carefully, depending whether your bosses listen, I guess.
I mean, if someone said to me, Matt, would you like some money? Of course you're going to say yes. You'd be a fool not to. But no, I totally agree with what Vic's saying. Praise will essentially go further. So then a £20 note, it just will, because the knock-on effect of that, and almost that, the phrase paying it forward, it will just keep going. I think one of the things from this pandemic coming out is actually the recognition and praise and say of the NHS and things like that, where people are actually taking, maybe the government, if they actually want to do something sensible, take a step back and go, actually, without the NHS, we would have been absolutely screwed, that kind of thing. And then the praise comes on then, and then hopefully, touch wood, maybe the money bit then comes in after. And that's kind of like a side thought to the kind of main course, if you like, which is the praise and the recognition, and the money bit is the kind of little afterthought. I think it's going to get to that point, and I think it's going to be for the better in most cases. I think what Vic said as well, people leaving high paid jobs to go to a job which is less money, but what they're doing and the area it's in is more rewarding than the cash itself. So but yeah, anyone's going to take money. They'd be a fool not to, but going forward, I think that's the way life's going to be, definitely.
And there is this thing, isn't there, that it comes back to that value again, isn't it? If you feel valued, that's going to be the difference, and that's partly about the role that you're doing. But actually, how do you know you feel valued from the role you're doing? Yes, it'll be you personally getting a sense from that, but for many people as well, just having that recognition is really key as part of that. Great. Well, we've come to our points where we've got to draw our Leadership Lounge to a close. I always find this a bit sad, this part. It's been great spending time together, learning from one another and just debating the importance of praise and the impact that can have on retention, on motivation, on productivity, the focus of people, creating culture we've talked about. We've talked about the importance of being genuine with our praise, making sure it's suitable for the person, and focusing not just on outcomes, but on a kind of process and approach that people have too. But we come now to the point of the top tips. And so it's thinking about what would your top tip be? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to ask Vic first, then I'm going to ask Matt, and then I'm going to ask Tracy. So Tracy is going, phew, that gives me a bit longer to think about it. Vic is now going, darn, Colin, why are you asking me first? But by me keep talking like this, it gives you a few more moments to think, what would my top tip around the power of praise be? So Vic, over to you. What's your top tip for our listeners?
My top tip. I think my toppest tip is do it. Praise people. And my secondest tip that I was thinking is get to know your people so that you know what is meaningful for them.
Yeah, great. So there's two there you've sneaked in, but we'll allow it because they're both very good. Just do it is one, and the other one is get to know your people so you can really focus it. Brilliant. Thank you for those, Vic. Matt, has Vic nicked all of your top tips, or have you got another one that we can share with people?
I guess it's slightly similar, but it's what I said right at the beginning, which is not giving praise should be a crime, basically. So kind of changing the words to Vic's in the sense of just doing it, but it should be a crime. You know, there's no reason why you shouldn't be giving praise. And then I might sneak a second one in as well if it doesn't take Tracy's. But learning how best your team or the people you're with accept it, and how they need it as well. Yeah,
great. Fantastic. Thank you. And I do love that concept that we've now just made criminals of people if they don't do it. So you have a choice, listeners. Don't be a criminal. Great. Okay, Tracy, what about you? Have they nicked all of your top tips, or have you got another one to share?
No, and it'd be nice to fit in with this whole group here, so I'm going to have to give two. I think the first one, is just that whole being authentic and meaningful about it. Which I know we've discussed quite a bit already. Something we haven't discussed as much, but I think it's just worth thinking about if you're in leadership roles, is looking after your own sense of well-being. Because I think sometimes, when you're in the thick of it and you're in the demands, you can be very aware of those results. You can be very aware of the pressures and the things that get us all burdened. And it's then you don't notice the stuff that you need to be praising and recognising and affirming. So I think there's something about, let's be intentional about that. Look out for it. Make sure you've got your own headspace to be able to do those things and even notice them when you're in that sort of busy demand to say thank you amidst the madness sometimes, that you can praise others and look out for it.
Yeah, great. I love that sense then of making sure that we as leaders are fit to praise. We've looked after ourselves so that we are then alert enough to spot the things, to have that honesty and that authenticity in our praise. Brilliant.
Which means, I think, if you have a boss, tell them what kind of praise you need to get.
Yeah. So Vic has just sneaked a third one in there. That ability that if you have a boss, that you have a responsibility to kind of keep the boss informed in terms of what works for you. And it's all part of that culture you're trying to create. So, thank you, Vic, for sneaking in a third one there. Our listeners have not come away with just 3 top tips, but they've ended up with a total of 7. So that's brilliant. Good. Thank you ever so much, guys, for being part of the Leadership Lounge today. My thanks to Vic, to Tracy and Matt for being part of the Leadership Lounge. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in again. We hope you've enjoyed being part of the Leadership Lounge, looking at the power of praise, and we look forward to you joining us next month in the Leadership Lounge. So thank you very much, everyone.